I live in a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone. It's the sort of place where you leave your doors unlocked and kids play in the streets until the streetlights come on. But recently, that sense of security was shattered. Last Monday, as I was leaving for work, I noticed a man standing across the street from my house. He was tall, wearing a dark coat, and had a hat pulled low over his face. I didn't recognize him, which was odd for our town. I gave him a nod, but he didn't respond, just kept staring at my house. I thought little of it until I saw him again on Tuesday, and then Wednesday. By Thursday, I was genuinely unnerved. He was always there, just watching my house. I mentioned it to a few friends, and they joked that maybe I had a secret admirer. But this didn't feel like a joke. On Friday, I mustered the courage to approach him. "Hey, can I help you with something?" I asked. He didn't reply, just continued staring at me with an unsettling intensity. I pressed further. "Look, you're making me uncomfortable. Why are you here?" He finally spoke, his voice raspy. "I'm just waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked away, disappearing around a corner. I decided to report him to the local police. They said they'd keep an eye out, but without him committing a crime, there wasn't much they could do. The weekend passed without incident, and I began to feel a bit more at ease. Maybe he had moved on. But come Monday, he was back. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, similarly dressed in dark clothing, her face obscured by a scarf and sunglasses. I was at my wit's end. I decided to hire a private investigator to figure out who these people were and what they wanted. The PI got back to me 2 days later with information that left me stunned. The man and woman were private investigators themselves, hired by a distant relative who believed I had something that belonged to them. They had been watching me, trying to determine if I had a particular family heirloom in my possession. I confronted the duo with this information, and they finally opened up. They apologized for the scare and explained their client's suspicions. It turned out there was a mix-up in communication, and they had been watching the wrong house the entire time. Relieved, I laughed it off and we parted ways. But the experience left me shaken. I've since installed security cameras and keep my doors locked at all times. When I was in college, I rented a small old house with 2 of my friends, Mark and Lisa. The house was a bit run down, but it was all we could afford. The previous tenants had left in a hurry, and the landlord was eager to get new renters. He gave us a good deal, and we didn't ask too many questions. The first few weeks were uneventful. We settled into our routines and life was good. But then, strange things started happening. It began with small, almost unnoticeable incidents. A door would be open when we were sure we had closed it, or a light would be on in a room no one had been in. We brushed it off, blaming each other or our forgetfulness. But then, things escalated. One night, I was up late studying in the living room. Mark and Lisa had gone to bed hours ago. I was engrossed in my textbook when I heard a soft whisper coming from the hallway. I froze, straining my ears. The whispering continued, but I couldn't make out the words. I called out, thinking maybe Mark or Lisa was up, but there was no response. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. I felt a cold breeze on my neck, and the hairs on my arms stood up. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it towards the hallway. There was nothing there. I was about to dismiss it as my imagination when I heard a loud bang from upstairs. It sounded like someone had dropped something heavy. I rushed up the stairs, my heart pounding. I checked Mark's room first. He was sound asleep. Then I went to Lisa's room. She was also asleep, but her window was wide open, and the curtains were billowing in the wind. I closed the window and went back downstairs, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew something was off. The next morning, I told Mark and Lisa about the previous night. They both looked uneasy. Lisa said she had been having nightmares for the past week, and Mark admitted he had heard the whispering too. We decided to do some research on the house. We discovered that a family had lived there in the 1960s. The father had gone mad and killed his wife and children before taking his own life. Locals believed the house was haunted, and many reported seeing shadows and hearing voices. We were freaked out but didn't want to break our lease. We decided to bring in a medium to cleanse the house. She arrived a few days later, a tall, thin woman with piercing blue eyes. She walked around the house, burning sage and chanting. When she was done, she told us the spirits were at rest, and we would have no more problems. For a while, things were quiet. But then, one night I was alone in the house. Mark and Lisa had gone out, and I was enjoying some alone time. I was watching a movie when I heard a soft knock on the front door. I muted the TV and listened. The knocking continued, slow and deliberate. I approached the door cautiously and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing outside, his face obscured by a hood. He looked up and our eyes met. I felt a chill run down my spine. I didn't recognize him, and something about him felt off. I decided not to open the door and went back to the living room. But the knocking continued, growing louder and more insistent. I called Mark and Lisa, but neither of them answered. I was starting to panic. Suddenly, the knocking stopped. I waited, holding my breath. Then I heard the back door creak open. I grabbed a kitchen knife and hid behind the couch. I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. I was about to make a run for it when my phone rang. It was Mark. He sounded panicked. He told me that they had been in a car accident and were at the hospital. Lisa was in critical condition. I was in shock, trying to process what he was saying when I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't be here," it whispered. I turned around and the hooded man was standing there holding a knife. I screamed and lunged at him, catching him off guard. We struggled and I managed to knock the knife out of his hand. I ran out of the house, not looking back. I called the police and they arrived within minutes. They searched the house but found no sign of the intruder. They took my statement and promised to keep an eye on the house. I went to the hospital to be with Mark and Lisa. Lisa was in a coma, and the doctors weren't sure if she would make it. Mark was in shock, blaming himself for the accident. A few days later, the police called. They had reviewed the security footage from the night of the break-in. The footage showed the hooded man entering the house, but there was something else. Another figure, a shadowy figure, was following him. The figure seemed to be guiding him, leading him towards the living room. The police were baffled. They couldn't explain the footage, but I had a theory. The spirits in the house were not at rest. They were angry and wanted revenge, and they had used the intruder to get to us. Lisa never woke up from her coma. Mark and I moved out of the house and never looked back, but I still have nightmares about that night. And I can't shake the feeling that the spirits are still out there, watching, waiting for their next victim.